Now, this is my display cabinet for most of my ancient artifacts. It's in the dining room, so it's right next to our dining room table. I don't care to show you the dining room because our house, which is a historic house, is undergoing significant structural repairs, so everything's pretty torn up. It was through a fire and it sat abandoned for 10 years, but we are trying to save it. But I would love to show you my collection, especially now that I have added new lights, because the original lights, these tape lights, half the strand stopped working, and even though I tried repairing it, I couldn't get it to work. So I don't know what was wrong with it. Now, I'm not liking the new lights as much. Same brand, about 5, 6, 7 years apart maybe. They're LED tape lights, but their idea of white comes off as blue, so I actually have to use the yellow setting, which it calls it orange. It's definitely yellow in my view, and it looks more like a warm natural lighting, such as our porch light out there, versus the beautiful crisp white, which is probably coming off as blue on your screen. It is actually white though in person, which I've run with the latter half, or the first half of the strand of the original strand. But anyway, the nice thing about LED tape lights, other than that they are self-adhesive when they're not 6 years old, so I'm using clips down here, is that LEDs do not hurt things like pigments, as we'll see. So this beautiful tunic fragment Coptic is completely safe to have these lights on even all night if I wanted. Now, I don't do that. I only do that when we have guests or when we're eating supper here. But the LED lights do not hurt the pigments, and they highlight a lot of colors, such as that piece of turquoise down there, or artificially dyed stones like that. I just threw in some stones and gems and stuff. But anyway, this is my antique display cabinet. Up top we have whatever that is with some cactuses. We have a antique light. It's dated on the font because this is an oil lamp inside here that I just ran a wire up. It doesn't hurt it at all. There's no holes or anything drilled, but the font inside, if you pulled this up, is dated 1901. We have a reproduction, which I actually use. Some mineral specimens. Most of the fossils are actually in a different room. A large, incredibly large, Judean Iron Age jug. It's not sitting on the bare metal, it's sitting on a thick rubber. So this round bottom pot is completely safe up there, nestled in its little nest, and it's tied at 2 points to the wall. You can see through that damage there that it's pit fired inside. This is actually the piece that got me collecting ancient pottery. I've had that plant like 15 years now, since I was a kid. Back there, we have some reproduction coins of the Bible. I like to use those as teaching tools. I do have real coins. So there's a widow's mite. I have a beautiful widow's mite, absolutely incredible specimen upstairs on some more religious displays. Not sure if that little menorah, little tag thing is a reproduction or not. And there's a coin I have not been able to date, some sort of Roman provincial coin. Here we have a lovely Roman stylus for use in writing in wax tablets, in diptychs or triptychs, as they're called, the folding tablets. So with that end, you make erasures, and with that end, you inscribe. Here we have a supposedly metal detected in Kievan Rus cross necklace. It would be post-medieval. an undated fibula that I actually use. That part's modern, that part would be metal detected in Ukraine. Here we have an English longbow point, the first armor-piercing round from, what is it, 1300s? I have it written down somewhere. There's my new Greek Erebelos. A couple oil lamps. The one in the back is definitely a reproduction, and I think the one up front isn't all that old, but I don't think it's a reproduction. I think it's something that was used, but it's not ancient. An unidentified pot. Not sure on the age of it. It does not seem to be ancient, but I think it's definitely old. You can see that I reconstructed this ancient Egyptian alabastron, which is a smaller version of what Mary would have poured out on Jesus when she anointed him before the crucifixion. So it's made of alabaster, and that's what it would have looked like. The bottom half's original, the lug and stuff, and the upper portion is made out of clay. This oil lamp, came out of a Byzantine monastery, and I have all the documentation for it. So it is one of my favorite relics. Now it's not sitting on this gravel that I glued together. It's sitting on a little rubber base because I don't let my artifacts get beat up and stuff. Here we have a nice oil jug that I have mounted as if it's pouring into it. Bible verse about keeping watch. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gifts to Jesus, including a coin of the Magi. That one's a silver drachma. It's not the gold or anything they gave him, but they definitely would have carried it along in their journey. I have not been able to identify that oil lamp fragment. There's a typical Roman fragment back there. Since we're on oil lamps, this is my oldest oil lamp. This one is probably 2,500 plus years old and is typically seen in ancient Israel. That is a Canaanite pot. Now, I can't remember the exact date, but it should predate Moses. And I have all the documentation for that and stuff, and it's just so hard to find Canaanite artifacts. Now, I collect biblical artifacts. There's many more that I have that aren't in this cabinet that I use as teaching tools to bring the Bible to life. So, Canaanite artifact, it's always a pleasure to see them. Typical Herodian pottery, this with the banding and stuff, and the round bottom and the color. It's very typical of Herodian pottery around the time of Jesus. This is a broken jug. That's an Egyptian olla, probably from World War I. It's not that old. I found it at a thrift store, and I just really liked it and thought it was cool. And sometimes I wonder if this was a pot that was used to hold slip or just a white pigment for applying to pottery, like you see that red band on this olla. I'm just not really sure what it's used for. I'm not sure how old it is, but it's definitely ancient. It passes all the tests. That's what's known as the clavis design. That would have hung down as a tunic. No, it's not a dagger. It's just a vertical decoration on Byzantine and Coptic tunics and stuff. And of course Roman, but this piece is not Roman. Okay, down for the glass. On my very last day in Washington State, before I moved across the country, this piece arrived in the mail. I was so worried. Like, well, I have forwarding enabled, so... But I got it basically right as I was leaving. And that would be a medieval Islamic basket weave pattern bottle that's been reconstructed professionally. This is the better side. It's actually in pretty poor shape, but all the pieces are there. I just really, really liked it. That little alabastron-shaped vessel is a reproduction. You can actually see the metal wire vertically in it. So it's supposed to be a core-formed vessel, but it wasn't. It's a fake. I was disappointed. I believe that to be a Byzantine perfume. The bands are purple. It's hard to see that. I believe this was an ink pot, maybe, from what would be modern day Turkey. It's hard to date it, but it would probably be early Islamic. Here we have a incredible Roman vessel. I have an unboxing video where you'll see the color much better. It's a beautiful like eggplant or mauve. And the banding in it is just incredible. And it's almost a round bottom, so I have it on a sticky little pad to keep it in place and to absorb any vibrations. This one I call the Christmas tree bottle. You can kind of see the blue in addition to the green. My roommate thinks it's ugly. He thinks it's the ugliest one in the whole collection, the ugliest piece I have. It's actually one of my earliest pieces. It would be medieval Islamic. I just thought it was cool. We have this vessel, some kind of vase, I guess, medieval Islamic. We have a Roman figural cluster of grapes, and a couple reproduction bottles that I have on hand just to show people. There's some fossils that I dug up with my, well, I had spent some time in Wyoming, and I prepared them myself. I just wish his face was there. I actually dug up 3 that were all missing the face. This one was my first ancient vessel. It was an interesting medieval Islamic pot, again, for a perfume. So I guess you'd call it an unguentarium. It's a fake arrowhead, but this arrowhead I know is real. I found it on my first day of being homeless years ago. It's actually why I left Washington State. On my first day of being homeless, I was heading towards where I was going to be camping, and just walking along the canyon wall, and I found that arrowhead at the top. It was about to fall down the 2,000-foot drop. Well, it wasn't 2,000 feet, but it sure felt like it. So I picked it up. This thing, as you may remember from a previous unboxing video, this poor little bowl came shattered after it had already been reconstructed by somebody at some point. So I had to reconstruct it for a second time in its poor existence. Here we have the Indus Valley collection. Back there, next to another fish fossil, is a bird whistle. Now, technically, I guess I shouldn't call these Indus Valley. These aren't Harappan. Well, one might be. These are going to be Nal and Coolie culture. So, same region of the world, Balochistan, Pakistan, India. That one is a repaint, in my opinion. The pot, I think, is ancient, but the pigment is not. This one is genuine. And actually, that little dark brown spot there was a piece of wet clay from where it had gotten pushed up against a unfinished pot before it was fired and painted. I should say before it was painted, after it was fired. But anyway, and I plucked it off. It was just nice to see that the brown color was perfectly intact, perfectly preserved for 2,000 plus years. I mean, most of the Nal and Coolie stuff's going to be about 2,500 to 3,000 years old. Now, the British like to call these beakers for some reason. I call these urns. No, they didn't hold ashes. It's just the shape is definitely, in my opinion, an urn. And those are like stylized deer and stuff. The Indus peoples were very abstract with their art. That's both a plate and a jar lid. They were multi-purpose. So it sits on top of a jar and you can use it to, I guess, play chess. That's a joke, of course. But this was my first piece of Indus pottery. And I can't show you here, so probably a future video, but there's actually crystals, calcite crystals, growing from the roof of the pot. So that's a fun indication of authenticity. Here's a nice people leaf pattern, sort of their tree of life in India to this day, actually. I believe this is a original pigment one, but I'm not certain. Now there's a nice Indus piece back there. Same pattern motif on the reverse. This one was technically polychromed, and it's knobbed nullware because those bumps stick out. So that makes it knobbed. Culture was null culture, Indus Valley. And it was red, black, and yellow. Very little of the yellow survived, some of the red has survived. It has a removable conservation glaze on it to prevent the calcium salts from reblooming, which will destroy the pot otherwise. Some ancient fossils found. They're pyritized, so they're basically golden. Another fossil. Another fossil. My fossil collections elsewhere. No, I did not dig those belemnites, whatever they call them, up. I found that at a thrift store. This is a rather new piece in here. This is only from the 1700s. And I just really like the dark inclusion in the glass. And it spirals around the bottle 2.5 times. Another rather new piece, later Victorian pipe with a fox. Not sure on the culture of that bowl. It's antique but not ancient. And here we have some Mesoamerican pieces. The name of the culture, there it is, Huastic. That's the name of the culture. That's a bat-faced pot missing its spout. And the reverse side is in very poor shape, unfortunately. And then this piece has some really fascinating root marks in it that we might get lucky and see. Yes, do you see those root marks in there? It's definitely showing up better in person. Hopefully you can see them. It's always a great indication of authenticity. So these would be probably 1100s to 1500s. This is a cartonnage fragment that I ordered from a collector in Turkey. So it's basically pigmented plaster that's applied to a very coarse linen, a little bit more coarse and stiff and weave than what they would use to actually wrap the mummy, but this would go over the mummy before the actual sarcophagus or other cases that they're using. This frame, just something I had on hand. It needs a better frame with a matting. Just a random, not Victorian. I almost said vintage, then I almost said Victorian. Just a random, somewhat ancient coin. And this piece, this is made out of stone. This is a cooking pot. It retains the original soot. And this one I don't want to pick up right now. Obviously I put everything down, but it actually has iron rivets in it, the staples that they used to repair it when apparently it was dropped at some point. But instead of carving this going around in a big circle, you can see they carved it vertically, which is just an incredibly difficult way to do it. But it has nice handles, a nicely defined rim, and I believe these date to about the early period of British occupation of India to about 1800. Took me a long time to figure out how old these things are because I see them occasionally. For some reason, they're sold as Indus Valley, and I'm not sure why because they're definitely not. It's not even from the same region of India. But it's just a really neat antique pot. And just a random rock that I found in Wyoming. No, Oregon. Or was it? I can't remember which. It was one of them. It's written on the back. Everything's labeled. So that's a lot of my collection. I hope you enjoyed. A lot of missed unboxing videos there.